Welcome, everyone. I'm really appreciate your coming out this morning. I'm Jan Kessel, the president and founder of Environics Analytics. I want to start off the meeting with two things. First of all, I apologize that my French you would not want to hear, but the last part of the presentation this morning, I think Evan is going to do in French, so I'm going to kick us off in English, but we do have the slides translated. Secondly, I want to acknowledge that we're hosting this event on land which has been long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous people whose presence marks these territories on which many people now gather. Today we're here to talk to you about a new development that we just completed at the end of the first quarter in terms of a partnership with LiveRamp. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit about the background, and what this means for our existing customers and for others who may not be as familiar with us and what we do. So if you don't know us, just a really quick introduction. We were founded in 2003 by me, and as from one person, we're now almost 300 employees in Canada. We work on insights for many, many customers. And so we're kind of known as data people, but we also provide a lot of analytics services, both through services and through platforms and through software. Last year, we worked with about 700 clients across most industries. A little bit more, well, a lot more on the consumer marketing than on the B2B side, but we do work on both sides of the business. And we also have partnerships with major agencies, platforms, and publishers. We believe that Canada is a relatively small market, and when technology comes over the border, it doesn't always work for Canada. And for a long time in this career, and then previously, don't know that there's anyone in the room who's old enough, but I used to run a business in Canada called CompuSearch, and we were the first kind of postal code targeting data systems in Canada. And then after that company was kind of broken up and transformed and sold, I started this company in order to build on that tradition. But what I always found was that, you know, the privacy laws have been stricter in Canada for 25 years than even in Europe, although people don't realize that, and definitely different from the US. And, you know, Canada is a larger landmass with 10% of the population, so the way the population lives and organizes itself is quite different. Quebec is a different market in Canada compared to the way the US thinks of their submarkets. And of course, we have over 20%, well over 20% now, foreign born. So when you think about doing business and marketing in Canada, there's many ways in which Canada is part of North America, and there's many ways in which it's different. And being a data and analytics provider, we've always had to wrestle with how to bring to Canada the best of breed technology and incorporate it into not only the way Canadian data works in the regulatory environment, but really how populations make decisions about what they're going to buy and how we market to them. So when we go to market, we always try to work in partnerships so that we can Canadianize what needs to happen, and we can also make Canadian solutions part of the global solution. We essentially do three things. Number one, we build a lot of databases, and I think most people in this room are familiar with that, and if you're not, then you can always give us a call and we can give you the short course. I'm not going to go through them all, but about 30,000 variables at the postal code level updated to the most recent available and really the most recent required data when it comes to demographics, financial behavior, psychographics, health, business, segmentation, behavioral, mobile data, and geographic and location data. So in each one of those, there's a big story, but people are familiar with PRISM, with our wealth data, with our social values data, which help understand what message motivates different groups of people. We update all of these databases mostly quarterly or on an annual basis. And one of the key things we do is we model them down to the postal code. So if you go to most of the best of breed providers of information about consumer behavior or psychographics or financial behavior, whether people pay off their credit card, how many cards they use, et cetera. When you take all of those databases that are available in Canada, based on sample surveys, they're typically available for Canada and the provinces and the larger markets. And we have agreements with most of those providers using proprietary methods to create the postal code version of those databases. And those postal code version of the databases, whether it be from Ipsos or Vividata or Numeris or others, they belong to us and they become part of our ecosystem. So big job for us, and from that big staff photo you saw on the first page, more than a third of the people are data scientists, quantitative geographers, lots of PhDs, lots of master's degrees, and it's their job to make all those data available in using the best statistical practices, making sure that it complies with the very strict privacy rule, and make them accessible so that people can use them. Although we do work with data science departments and IT departments, the majority of our customers are people who are actually running a program, delivering services, front of line, and that happens because all of those data become available in what we call our advanced analytics platform, Envision. About 60% of the usage of our data comes through our Envision platform. The others come from people licensing the data and building it into their own solutions, or actually through reseller partners where some of our data make their way into other people's solutions. But the third part of our business right now is kind of going from that insights where we do segmentation and personification and location analysis to making sure that brands and government organizations as well can use the same data to actually engage and interact with their customers as what they used in order to do the insights. So the slogan that's on everybody's lips is insights to activation and to measurement of results. And this announcement today is really helping us take a step further along that route to measurement of results. A couple of years ago, Environics Analytics really didn't do very much in the ad tech world. And we had customers saying to us, well, we're using your data to define our best audiences, and we actually want to be able to go and execute against them. So 3 years ago, we embarked on a strategy, well, a little bit more with the media companies, but to actually put our data out there in the ecosystem so that you could buy against the audiences and the definitions of your best potential customers. And as you can see from the chart on the right, we have now put our data out there with a wide variety of partners, including the major broadcasters, the out-of-home industry, and then the technology providers where our data are there available to buy different kinds of media across different channels and across different screens. And what that led us to, and we've been doing that now for the last 2.5 years, so agencies and publishers can actually offer people the ability to execute against their Environics targets in the ad tech space. But of course it leads us to the next step, which is, well, how do we know what's working? And you know the old joke that 50% of my advertising works, I just don't know which half. And what our objective is to help organizations in Canada be able to really have that kind of true outcomes measurement that is going to enable them to spend against potential. Okay, going to the... So a little bit more in the last year, we worked for 466 advertisers, 26 agencies. We have 30 non-media reseller partners and 30 media publisher platforms. We had 338 organizations use that Envision platform with 900 users, and last year they ran 300,000 reports. That's profiles, personas, media rankings, lift analysis that can be done within the system. And you can see here, customers are using all different kinds of data. I always think it's funny when people get into that, my data is better than yours. Well, you have, I mean, for me, we're always on the receiving end of, well, you have that crappy old postal code stuff. I have the real data over here. But the truth is, in my several decades, every time there's an advance and we get new kinds of data, the data that we've produced, which is the foundation, what I like to call the denominator of everything about the consumer marketplace in Canada, we've grown. So when people got their CRM systems organized and when we went digital, we didn't decrease in the amount of third-party data we were producing and making available to the marketplace because we actually grew a lot. And the reason for that is the people who are using data effectively use all kinds of data for different purposes, and it's really a question of what's fit for purpose for certain kinds of analysis. What's really important to people right now is being able to leverage their first-party data. And our experience has been that because organizations have been giving us their data, even if it's just postal code data, it's still customer data with a 6-digit postal code. More often than not, they do give us more data than we want, and we strip it off and send it back. But organizations all across Canada have trusted us for a long time to take their data and help them analyze it. But what we've been asked for in the last 3 years is really, how do I leverage my first-party data in this whole mix? And so multiple advertisers, we would have 2 customers who really want to look at their overlap and their white space so that they could do co-marketing together. And people want to understand, what am I allowed to do and not allowed to do? Advertisers and media is always obviously a big one, like being able to get across multiple screens. Advertisers, would be nice from a media company's point of view if just wanted to buy TV or just wanted to be programmatic. But we know the reality is people are trying to understand their reach and their frequency across multiple screens. And so we need to bring disparate sets of first party or sensitive data together in order to do that. And then, in the real proof is in the pudding. If a brand buys across multiple screens with multiple platforms and publishers, they want to know what worked. And it's not a question of saying, well, this one worked better and this one didn't, and therefore I'm going to drop this one. What our customers are saying to us is they want to know where to put their money and how to test and learn and how to really look at different ways of getting their dollars spent and seeing the return on investment and testing and learning. And so a couple of years, so first of all, I think everyone in this room knows, but if you don't, just in total transparency, 3 years ago, my partners and I sold Environics Analytics to Bell Canada. And Bell Canada, in our announcement in Toronto, were very clear that their acquisition of Environics Analytics, their investments in these clean room environments, and their support for this deal is, and there's some Bell people in the room, but disappointingly enough, it's not just to give Bell an unfair advantage, it's to serve the whole Canadian marketplace, because we're really struggling in Canada with how we can have a big tent where people can mix data, and given Bill C-27, which is still in front of the federal Parliament, and Law 25 in Quebec and other changes, how can we do this collaboration in Canada and be compliant and help our Canadian businesses be competitive? So Bell invested right away after Environics, and Environics is a separate corporation, a wholly owned affiliate of BCE. And right after that, one of the key things we invested in is, can we build cloud-based platforms for collaboration in order to blend data safely? And so we've invested a lot, and we've worked with a variety of partners to do that, but we also invested in our certification to ensure that we had the highest level of privacy certification that's available. We went to the world standard, ISO standard. Very proud of the fact that we were the second company in the world to get ISO 31700, if you look it up. It's the strictest, we do not believe that just being privacy compliant right now in Canada is good enough. Being privacy compliant in Canada means adhering to a law called PIPEDA, which you're all familiar with, and CASL. PIPEDA was passed in 2000. So it's a 24-year-old law. And the other thing people often don't know about it is that last year, PIPEDA got privacy or treaty compliance with the GDPR. So you think, well, Europe is way out there, and the US has been the Wild West, and now they're getting some privacy. And then, well, Canada has had the same kind of laws protecting consumer privacy, but also enabling businesses to use data for 24 years. That's equivalent to what happens in Europe. And so what we're doing is taking it to the next level of making sure that additional things like, are we minimizing the possibility of re-identification? Are we using consented data properly, whether it was an opt-in or an opt-out consent? What are we doing with signal data? We take signal data from telecoms, and we use those signal data to create footfall and mobile movement and web visitation behaviors. We do that with a rigorous process believe me, KPMG put us through the ringer to get this certification, 2.5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we now have the most advanced certification for how we process data and what we do with, really unit record data, where a phone goes or what a person does, what we do with that and how we turn it into information so that organizations can get insight. We've taken everything that we learned and that we put in place in our company across all these certifications, but particularly on privacy by design, and embedded it in our clean room offerings as to how we use customers' first-party data and combine it. So right now we're at that juncture in Canada, where we're dealing with the privacy regulations, the sort of fragmentation of the mindset and lost signals. Cookies going away, although I always laugh because, cookies were never the biggest thing about how you did ad tech marketing in Canada. Why? Because when everybody was, hair on fire about cookies and targeting in the US, we already had Castle. And so most brands were really reluctant to use the email address as an identifier or as a match key. So yes, of course, there is a challenge, but it's not like we didn't know about it, and it's not like we haven't prepared for it. But right now, with all these things coming together, we felt that we really had to invest in a solution that could help people leverage their first-party data and really look at where your first-party data overlaps or doesn't overlap with that of a publisher partner, as I said before, with that of a potential M&A or a go-to-market partnership, or from just the point of view of looking at your custom audience in relation to their reach across different kinds of media. And we knew that we needed new ways of operating. As I mentioned before, one of the first things we did when we got investment from BCE was we started to build a collaboration hub. We call it EA Vault. It's our clean room offering. We knew that there weren't going to be identity graphs in Canada. A persistent graph that says Jan Kessel is also Janice L. Kessel and she lives at this address and has these 3 email addresses. That's not happening. Any of those that are still kind of lurking around are probably not, maybe not illegal right now, but certainly not best practice. So what we knew we had to build was a way to collaborate and a way for people to bring their consented data and any consented IDs, because there's going to be lots of IDs out there. The Trade Desk has IDs. Brands are going to have their own individual ones. So we're going to have lots of IDs. And it's going to be the responsibility of those collectors and those ID providers to make sure that the disclosures are there and the privacy statements are there. But essentially what we needed to do was find a way to bring data and IDs together and collaborate so that organizations could look across platforms and publishers and be able to safely do that identification. And that's why we partnered with LiveRamp. If you don't know about LiveRamp, they're the largest provider of data collaboration in the world. They started off in the US and they did exactly what I said we would never be able to do, was they started off by building a big identity graph for the US. And they talked to some organizations in Canada 3 or 4 years ago about that, because they did have some residual email addresses that consumers put into their systems in the US. But the truth was, and because we've been talking to them for a long time, if we took our customer database and tried to onboard it through the LiveRamp graph, you might get like a match rate of 8 or 10%. And in the US, they were getting 35s and 40%, which is good when you're matching data. And of course, the reason for that was because organizations did not allow and did not use the email address as the connector. So when we started to do our work on identity resolution and collaboration, we also started talking to them about what they were doing in Europe, where they had to deal with a different kind of situation, where the GDPR rules were closer to what we were already working with in Canada. They're different in some ways, and we have our own problems on that. If anybody wants to have a long session on privacy, can give me a call, because it's something I have worked on since 1994 in Canada. But what we wanted to be able to do was take advantage of their learnings, both in the US and in Europe, knowing that Canada kind of sits in between. Many companies that Environics deals with only operate in Canada, you know, the banks and the telecoms. And many companies that we deal with operate globally, the manufacturers and the retailers and the travel companies. And we wanted a solution that would really be a Canadian solution that fit into a global solution. And so when we had the opportunity to sit down with them, see what they were doing in Europe, not doing identity graphing, but building identity resolution systems, building data collaboration hubs, and really building on top of clean room technology an opportunity to provide real measurement. So I just want to stop there and say, when people talk about clean rooms, they talk about all different kinds of things. Are you going to get into this? Am I stealing your thunder? A little bit? Okay, so I'll just say a little bit about it. So, you know, a clean room is a safe place with all the, you know, the security, like never mind privacy, the security regulations, that has containers or tenanted places in it where multi-tenanted data can go. So your data can be here, and somebody else's data can be here, and it can be protected. And then the clean room provider has the permissions from each entity to blend the data. But after you blend the data, there are rules about what comes out the other end. Like, it has to be anonymized or de-identified, it has to be aggregated. And so what we did was take the technology for data collaboration and identity resolution and many of our own algorithms for measuring lift and outcomes, and also sort of our own work at the other end that we've been doing for a long time to clean and organize first-party data before you get into it. I forgot to mention that. If you don't clean and organize your data and you're trying to match it deterministically, your match rate's going to be quite low. And even if you clean it and then you try to add probabilistic matching, you're going to get a response. And we've had tons of examples in our 30 POCs where we start with the data and we get, you know, a 15% match, and then we clean it a little more and we get a 20% match. And it makes a big difference in terms of the quality of the analysis. Remember, when we're doing lift analysis, at the end of the day, we want to be able to tell an organization, for this custom audience in this market, online versus online around this store. So no matter how big your sample is, when you come down to really wanting to advise someone in retail media or advise someone in TV sales, you have to be able to have a large enough sample in your outcomes measurement to be able to go and execute against it. And it's really, really important. So we're super excited that the combination of what LiveRamp built in technology, our knowledge of the Canadian marketplace, the trust that a lot of Canadian companies have in us, gives us the opportunity to create what I call a big tent for agencies and publishers and advertisers to collaborate. We're also making the technology, so with the LiveRamp technology, organizations can license it from us and we can help you with the implementation, or we can do services using it so that you can use us as your service provider, and we'll have an Environics team that will do the usual kind of diagnostic, project plan, execution, project managers to execute that whole strategy. Or if organizations want to license the data, they can do that. And if partners want to use our clean room as a back office, even if, you know, they're perceived to be a competitor of our owner, BCE is 100% committed to, we're working with Chorus and Rogers on some aspects of collaboration, and working with, you know, it's really not so much about their competitors, it's about the fact that the majority of customers want to look across the whole ecosystem. So we're building a collaboration community that with the proper licensing, really anyone in Canada can use, and it can connect you into a global ecosystem. And they've been a great organization to work with. You may or may not know their history. I think they have 900 global brands using the LiveRamp technology. They work in 22 markets, and they're connected to 150 DSPs and SSPs. So that's a broad reach for people who are looking for large audiences. I am going to introduce Evan Wood, who's our Chief Strategy Officer, who's also been working with me very closely over the 5 months to negotiate this deal. And to be very clear, we are the exclusive user and reseller of the LiveRamp technology and the LiveRamp brand in Canada. In other words, they made a decision rather than opening up the Canadian market, and they've never done it before, so you can imagine that was a fun negotiation. But it made a lot of sense for them to come into Canada through us, and we're really thrilled that they decided to do it.
Thanks, Jen. So you want to take that and forward as I forward to mine?
Okay.
Forward your first one.
Okay. If I screw up, if I don't keep it up with him, let me know, okay?
Ok, merci Jeanne et bonjour à tous. Je suis très content d'être ici aujourd'hui à Montréal avec vous. Je dois avouer que ça fait très longtemps depuis que je parle en français et que j'ai fait une présentation en français. Alors d'abord, je vous prie de m'excuser. Je demande un peu de patience et on y va. Ok, je suis ravi d'être ici aujourd'hui pour vous donner plus de détails sur ce nouveau partenariat passionnant. Une collaboration sûre et sécurisée en matière de données permet non seulement de relever de nombreux défis auxquels les organisations sont confrontées aujourd'hui, comme l'a mentionné Jeanne, mais aussi d'offrir de nombreuses nouvelles opportunités de revenus. La solution EA et LiveRamp contribuent réellement à accélérer ces opportunités pour tous nos clients et partenaires. Permettez-moi de vous expliquer en quoi consiste ce partenariat et comment et pourquoi il va changer la donne pour le marketing canadien. Tout d'abord, le partenariat lui-même. Dans le cadre de ce partenariat, EA est le fournisseur exclusif de la technologie, des produits et des services de LiveRamp au Canada. C'est vraiment énorme pour nous. La technologie éprouvée de LiveRamp est utilisée par plus de 900 marques dans le monde, par tous les principaux DSP et SSP, et se connecte à plus de 18 000 domaines d'éditeurs. Et ceci continue de croître. Notre solution profite à tous les partenaires du secteur, qu'il s'agisse d'annonceurs, d'agences ou des sociétés de médias et d'éditeurs. Nous fournissons une plateforme et un environnement de collaboration de données de bout en bout. La protection de la vie privée en avant, en d'autres termes, plus qu'un simple respect de réglementation en matière de protection de la vie privée, fournit une solution d'identité sécurisée qui s'appuie sur une technologie éprouvée, mais qui est adaptée au Canada et qui fonctionne avec d'autres identités, telles que UID2 et PAIR de Google, permet l'adressage et l'activation de l'audience à grande échelle, fournit une véritable mesure des résultats sur l'ensemble des plateformes médiatiques, y compris les jardins clos, et enfin est interopérable avec tous les fournisseurs de services en nuage, de sorte que vos données n'ont pas besoin d'être déplacées. Nous pensons que c'est assez excitant. Voyons donc un peu plus en détail ce qu'il en est. Selon une étude récente, 62% des dirigeants considèrent la résolution du problème de la fragmentation de données comme une priorité absolue cette année. Il s'agit à la fois d'essayer de remédier les silos de données internes et la fragmentation des données externes à travers les différents canaux médiatiques. Ceci est un élément essentiel d'une stratégie de données de première partie, mais elle doit être bien menée pour être efficace. Pour être en mesure d'exploiter des données disparates et de tirer parti de ces actifs à des fins de collaboration, il faut bien plus qu'une technologie appropriée, ce qui est souvent l'objectif principal de l'industrie. Une focalisation très étroite. Notre vision et notre solution vont bien au-delà. En associant une technologie interopérable au processus, applications et données appropriées, ainsi qu'au cadre de gouvernance et de la protection de la vie privée adéquate. Nous avons des salles blanches, bien sûr, mais les nôtres sont dotées de technologies exclusives de renforcement de la confidentialité. Et elles sont conçues pour que vos données ne soient jamais déplacées et peuvent être hébergées ou intégrées dans n'importe quel nuage. Elles offrent des autorisations sécurisées au niveau de la taxonomie, de l'audience et de la vue des données, et vous pouvez modifier, limiter ou révoquer l'accès à ces autorisations à tout moment. Nous pouvons également connecter différentes salles blanches car notre technologie est totalement interopérable. En ce qui concerne la couche des données, nous l'envisageons de manière très large. Lorsque nous parlons des données d'exposition, nous parlons de tout. Web ouvert, jardin clos, hors domicile, télévision linéaire, télévision adressable, OTT, etc. À notre avis, la collaboration en matière de données ouvre toutes sortes de possibilités pour mieux connaître vos clients, élaborer votre stratégie en matière de données sur les consommateurs, lancer de nouveaux partenariats et relier les points pour obtenir des nouvelles informations puissantes que vous ne pouvez tout simplement pas obtenir d'une autre manière. Comment cela fonctionne-t-il? Nous considérons la collaboration en matière de données comme un ensemble de 4 ingrédients clés fonctionnant de manière transparente, d'un bout à l'autre. Tout d'abord, une stratégie d'identité qui vous permet d'éliminer vos silos de données internes et de créer un identifiant unique basé sur la personne. Deuxièmement, l'accès à une plateforme intuitive et puissante qui vous permet d'exploiter vos données, les combiner avec d'autres données, y compris les données tierces de EA, et de créer des audiences cibles. Troisièmement, la possibilité de connecter à l'écosystème des médias, de diffuser facilement ces audiences sur toutes les plateformes médiatiques et les DSP. Et dernièrement, mais très important, il faut pouvoir accéder à des informations critiques basées sur la mesure des résultats à partir de toutes les plateformes, y compris les jardins clos. Chacune de ces étapes critiques possède à sa propre technologie et ses propres processus spécialisés, soutenus par l'expertise de EA et de LiveRamp, et sont conçus pour fonctionner ensemble afin que vous puissiez tirer le meilleur parti de votre collaboration en matière de données. Pour l'identité, nous avons le moteur d'identité qui peut être installé dans votre propre environnement technologique pour créer votre propre graphique d'identification interne en toute sécurité. Nous pouvons également vous aider à intégrer vos données de première partie de la manière la plus sécurisée possible grâce à notre encodeur local en conservant vos informations d'identification personnelle dans votre propre environnement. Pour l'accès, nous disposons de la Data Collaboration Platform, un système basé sur la SaaS pour la création d'audience, l'enrichissement et l'adressage à grande échelle. En ce qui concerne la connectivité, nous disposons déjà de près de 16 millions d'identifiants authentifiés pour le Canada grâce à la solution de trafic authentifié ATS disponible via un vaste réseau. Et nous sommes en passe de plus que doubler de chiffres dans les 9 à 10 prochains mois. En ce qui concerne les informations, nous pouvons fournir des mesures des résultats que vous recherchez, de l'analyse de l'effet de levier à la portée et à la fréquence inter-écran sur toutes les plateformes, y compris les jardins clos, grâce à l'acquisition récente de Abu par LiveRamp. Des outils de l'expertise adéquats orchestrés de manière transparente. En 2021, le service de recherche Capgemini a constaté que les avantages financiers potentiels des écosystèmes de collaboration des données peuvent atteindre 9% des chiffres d'affaires annuels d'une organisation au cours des 5 prochaines années. Quels sont les cas d'utilisation examinés dans le cadre de cette étude? Suivi de l'efficacité de la publicité, du ciblage, partage des données et d'informations sur les nouvelles recherches et les nouveaux développements, partage des données relatives à la consommation et à l'utilisation des produits et des services, partage des données de mobilité agrégées pour les services tels que les villes intelligentes, le stationnement, la cartographie, etc., et partage des données relatives aux achats et aux transactions en ligne. La collaboration en matière des données ouvre de nouvelles perspectives de croissance. Elle vous donne accès à toutes les données dont vous aurez besoin, avec les possibilités infinies de connecter des ensembles de données uniques. Ici, vous pouvez voir celles de différentes fonctions et points de contact, vos données internes, vos partenaires marketing et vos partenaires d'entreprise. Et nous continuons à développer les réseaux de partenaires, y compris avec des propriétaires des médias et des éditeurs canadiens. Nous avons eu des conversations avec un grand nombre d'entre eux et nous voulons bien sûr inclure des réseaux des éditeurs axés sur le Québec. Ainsi, lorsque vous réfléchissez à la collaboration en matière de données dans le cadre de votre stratégie de données de première partie, j'aimerais aussi vous ramener à une concentration sur le consommateur, plus précisément sur l'expérience ou le parcours du consommateur. Si vous prenez cet exemple de Disney, tout ce qui est dans le logo, entre les oreilles de la souris, est quelque chose que Disney peut suivre et sur lequel il peut recueillir des données. Les personnes qui ont un abonnement Disney+, ceux qui regardent certaines émissions, ceux qui visitent un parc Disney, les gens qui séjournent dans un hôtel. Beaucoup de données, c'est certain, mais il existe de nombreux points de contact avec les consommateurs que Disney ne contrôle pas, mais dont il tirerait profit s'il pouvait collaborer avec les bons partenaires. Ont-ils regardé un film de Disney à AMC ou quelque chose en rapport avec Disney sur YouTube ou aller à Target et acheter un pyjama Disney? L'accès à ces données peut prendre des décisions marketing plus intelligentes, du ciblage des publicités aux offres spéciales ou même des kiosques pop-up pourrait améliorer l'expérience du consommateur. Vous devez vraiment donc réfléchir à l'expérience du consommateur pour votre marque et aux personnes qui pourraient faire partie de votre réseau de collaboration. En d'autres termes, la collaboration en matière de données ouvre de nouvelles voies de croissance et de nouvelles opportunités de revenus. Et nous voulons être le partenaire qui permet d'y parvenir. Voyons donc rapidement comment cela fonctionne. Imaginez que vous êtes une grande entreprise de services financiers que vient de conclure une acquisition. Ils ont une certaine chevauchement avec votre clientèle existante, mais vous ne savez pas vraiment ni où. Ils ont des pièces manquantes dans votre puzzle. Vous savez sans doute que ce type d'intégration peut prendre des années. En fait, certaines entreprises ne se donnent même pas la peine de le faire. Mais c'est une énorme opportunité manquée, car ces précieuses données sur les consommateurs resteront bloquées dans un silo. À moins que vous les connectiez par la collaboration en matière des données. Ou encore, disons que vous êtes une détaillante nationale disposant d'un grand nombre de données très précieuses et que vous cherchez à créer une nouvelle source de revenus et le monétisant. Vous pouvez vendre une campagne à une marque et obtenir toutes les données dont vous avez besoin sur l'ensemble des canaux pour prouver qu'elle génère des ventes, ce qui vous permet d'obtenir encore plus de valeur grâce à ces données uniques que vous possédez. Ce type d'expérimentation peut vous aider à construire un réseau médiatique complet et à part entière et très lucratif. Imaginez maintenant que vous soyez Ford et que vous souhaitez mieux comprendre ce qui se passe après l'échéance de la garantie. Vous pourriez vous associer à une détaillante comme Canadian Tire pour savoir ce que vos clients dépensent et trouver des moyens de mieux les servir ou éventuellement de leur proposer des nouvelles offres. Ou peut-être vous êtes un restaurant à service rapide et voulez-vous assurer de fournir une innovation souple et centrée sur le client en étant capable de faire le lien entre ce que vos consommateurs vous disent sur les différents canaux et les tendances et ventes réelles. Tous ces exemples se font qu'effleurer, je ne peux pas prononcer cette mot, que l'effleurer les possibilités offertes par la collaboration en matière des données. Ensemble, Environics Analytics et LiveRamp occupent une position unique pour offrir à votre entreprise toute cette valeur. Commençons par la bonne fondation. Depuis ses débuts, il y a plus de 20 ans, EA est connu pour son leadership en matière de confidentialité et de sécurité des données. Nous continuons aujourd'hui à relever le bar car nous savons que ce n'est pas un domaine où il faut prendre des raccourcis. Avec LiveRamp, nous avons un partenaire qui partage les mêmes valeurs et qui s'engage à respecter les normes les plus strictes en matière de confidentialité, de sécurité et d'éthique de données, et dont la technologie a été utilisée à toute sécurité par des marques, des agences et des éditeurs à premier plan dans le monde entier. Ensemble, nous disposons des fondations les plus durables pour construire l'avenir. Abordons maintenant la question de la collaboration flexible. Nous sommes conçus pour l'ère des nuages, de sorte que vous pouvez collaborer dans n'importe quel nuage ou entre plusieurs nuages. Nous apportons notre technologie à vos données afin que vous n'ayez pas à les répliquer ou à les déplacer. Nous vous offrons une configurabilisation totale, des contrôles et des autorisations afin que vous puissiez construire et collaborer de la manière qui convient le mieux à votre entreprise. En bout de ligne, nous prenons en charge le plus large éventail possible de cas d'utilisation de la collaboration en matière des données et nous nous engagions à innover en permanence pour continuer à les élargir. Enfin, nous avons notre écosystème mondial de premier plan. Il s'agit du réseau le plus étendu et le plus riche en données du secteur que nous continuons à développer au Canada. Nous avons une connaissance approfondie de toutes les dimensions du marché et des relations de confiance de longue date avec les principaux éditeurs, plateformes médias, DSP et SSP. Rien ne peut l'égaler en termes d'échelle et de portée. Alors, en résumé, nous voulons travailler avec vous et renforcer vos efforts de collaboration en matière des données. Comme vous l'avez entendu aujourd'hui, nous disposons de tous les éléments nécessaires pour créer de la valeur pour les marques et les entreprises grâce à la collaboration en matière de données. Et nous avons plus de 700 clients au Canada qui pourraient bien être intéressés à le faire avec vous aussi. Alors, prenons contact de l'une des manières énumérées ici et nous aimerions poursuivre la conversation. Au nom de Jeanne et mon nom personnel, je vous remercie de vous être joints à nous aujourd'hui. Je vous souhaite une très bonne journée.
Thank you. Questions? Sir?
So, just to kind of understand regarding the journey that you showed for Disney, the elements that are outside of Disney's ecosystem, like the Target sales and things like that, these types of partnerships imply that Target also agrees to be in that partnership? So it's a multi-company partnership that's facilitated through LiveRamp?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's always blending multiple parties' first-party data based on their agreement to share. and each organization being responsible for their own consents and any IDs they bring in. That's kind of the clean room principle. For a limited time, for a specific purpose, the data will be shared, and we will be the third-party provider to both. And for the last couple of years, we've been like that clean room provider to Bell Media, to some other retailers, and so extending that, it's always a collaboration agreement, but we're providing that technology for that to take place. And as you could see from Evan's slide, there are many, many platforms and publishers and retailers already in that ecosystem in the US, some of which have presence in Canada, and others we're talking to about joining that collaboration hub in Canada. But always with the right permissions and the right agreements. We're not trying to build a consortium, big national consumer database. We don't think that that's going to fly in, well, I know that's not going to fly in Canada, so. But there could be more than one player. You know, there could be, a brand could decide that they want to get their ad exposures from a broadcaster plus ad exposures from a programmatic DSP, or an agency could want to look across screens. So it's our role is a technology and analytics provider to a collaboration that's governed by the participating parties. The other thing I just want to mention is we did plan in the next 2 months to do 5 POCs for free, and we have a couple of opportunities left. They have to be relatively small and contained in order for us to be able to show other Canadian companies what can happen. So one we're working on with a not-for-profit, another one we're working on with an agency, and then we're talking with a couple of brands. So we are open to figuring out, you know, how we can, it's hard for people to kind of think, what does it mean exactly? So if you're interested in being a candidate for that, we can consider that. And the other thing, and I'm not saying this as an endorsation, but I can say that at our launch in Toronto, we had 5 national industry associations say how much they welcomed this and how they want us to come in and speak to their research and governance committees and support the concept and want to help us make this successful. So that was the Canadian Marketing Association, the IAB Canada, the ICA, the communications agencies, the ACA, the advertising agencies, and the Think TV. So these 5 organizations came to our event in Toronto and stood up and said, like, Canada really needs this. Let's figure out how to collaborate. So we're very heartened by that. And also partners like the Trade Desk and Snowflake. People get confused about what's a clean room. There's lots of different kinds of clean rooms. So, you know, we've had partnerships with Snowflake and Optable, which we intend to continue. We've had partnerships with the Trade Desk. You know, we work with our partners at Bell Media about identity resolution that they're working on. So the idea is to try to get something that brings everything together.
I think it's very important. I mean, just coming back to that sort of network of collaboration, it's really important to be thinking outside your own silos, you know, because I think there's mutual value to looking at those collaboration partners. They're going to take something different from it than you're going to take from it from your end, but there's a real opportunity to move that first-party data collaboration forward under the right structure and governance, and it opens up huge rewards and opportunities. So they're doing, I think they're far, you know, they're more accelerated south of the border around, you know, pursuing this for many reasons, and I think there's a huge opportunity for us as Canadians to, you know, jump on that quickly as part of this first-party data strategy. Yes.
It's pretty good.
C'est dur, hein? Ça fait mal aux oreilles, hein? C'est un peu.
Small question. What is the target size of the business you are focusing? For instance, if you have a retailer with 5 stores, is it big enough to that kind of solution, or you target more enterprise like a Rona or that kind of business size?
Well, to Jan's point before, you know, we are going to be offering this as, you know, organizations can license the technology or they can use it through us as a managed service. Okay. We're happy to, you know, so as a managed service, we can look at, you know, smaller opportunities. I wouldn't worry so much about the size of first-party data. There's other sources of data that we can bring in as well, and that we can partner with others. So don't let size be a concern. Bring the opportunity to us, and we'd love to talk through it with you.
When we did our 30 POCs, and some of them are POCs, some of them were actually projects, over the last 3 years in our own environment before we expanded to their technology, we had big and small. We even had some smaller not-for-profits. How the service is charged depends on the size of the database, the effort that's needed to clean and organize the data. Sometimes it's nothing, but usually it's half the project, given how messy people's data always are. And then the other thing is how many custom reports have to be built, or how many of our canned reports suit your purposes. So the build of the cost of a project is pretty transparent, and we're open to small. Renee?
Maybe a few questions. You mentioned a few times wall gardens, which is spectacular. Is it up and running right now, or there is some time before implementing this?
So LiveRamp made an acquisition of what we would call an orchestration clean room provider called Habu. And there are many clean rooms that are really designed to be optimized for ad tech, and that was one of them. And they bought them in January, and we were just inside baseball, we were just in the throes of completing our deal, and we said, oh, we get that too, right? And they said, oh yeah, okay, I guess. So literally they closed that acquisition at the end of January, and they are now offering those services. And Habu is the only orchestration clean room that actually has that capacity to look at those walled gardens. So up and running, yes. Have we done any implementation in Canada? Not yet. Maybe Bell Media will be the first. He didn't even laugh.
Second question. I thought that this example was very interesting, and the link to Target by the page. So what is the architecture to get there? Let's take Canadian Tire as an example. Does Canadian Tire data and the draft already relies in the field or somewhere else, or to conduct an analysis between something that was broadcasted and Canadian Tire? Do we need Canadian Tire to join in? So how does it work?
Do you want to?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. It does require, obviously, Canadian Tire to participate in the collaboration. I'm not sure I understood the actual.
So the first point is, in the local encoder, then, a unique ID can be, Canadian Tire wants to participate in this collaboration. They can encode their customer file with their own enterprise ID, that this system can facilitate that easily. Like, they might not be the best example because they probably have the capacity to do it themselves, but be that as it may, a unique ID can look through all their disparate databases, join them together, and create that on their side of their firewall, and they get what you call an enterprise ID. If they then want to upload that into our data collaboration hub, then it gets the link ID from LiveRamp. And that key between that ID and somebody else's ID is only kept in the clean room by the clean room provider. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So
Did I answer it properly?
Yeah.
But it does make sense. So there's no way that some Canadian Tire data already lying, and so the trade desk could be used for, let's say, a project like this.
Well, if Canadian Tire has a deal with the trade desk, and that enterprise ID that they have is also linked to a trade desk ID, and that's the other thing that when Evan talks about interoperability, in the LiveRamp implementations, a permission-based coding at the publisher side for a LiveRamp ID could at the same time authenticate a trade desk ID or any other ID if we set it up that way. But it's all, you think of the principles in Canada, you have to be transparent to your consumers what you're doing. The consumer has to have a choice to agree to, and then after that, all of the workflows have to follow that. And that's really, of the things that Environics Analytics is bringing to this deal for LiveRamp, number one is we have that trusted relationship with a lot of clients. Number two, we have a reputation for high standard, high quality statistical work. But a big component of what we're bringing to them is how to enforce at every part of that workflow what we consider best practice in privacy. Not just obeys the law, but actually goes beyond the law. That's what we've built in layers. And we had already been building that governance layer for our own EA Vault clean room before we entered into this deal. So we have that layer about who gets to see the data, how long does it last, what has to be in the SOW, what's, how you connect to someone's CDP if you need to. So that layer's already been built by us, and that's being layered on top of the LiveRamp technology.
I think just to add on what Jan was saying, I think there's, Jan mentioned it in her remarks about there's not going to be one ID. There's already multiple IDs. There's not going to be one universal identifier. I think, LiveRamp's perspective, and I think this makes a lot of sense, is that they want it to be as interoperable and interconnected with as many IDs. So I mentioned, UID2, Google's Pair, it's, Connect ID. They've got a lot of different, what they call ride-along IDs to make sure that there's as much ID resolution and reconciliation in the market to create the biggest addressable audience that's possible out there through that. So,
but we have a job to do on this too, if I can get on my favorite soapbox for 2 minutes. Because as I said, I have been very involved in the privacy lobby in Canada for a long time, and I also have a personal appointment as an advisor to the federal government on Canada's national data strategy. And for those of us who want to be more data-driven and want businesses to be successful, we have to help consumers understand that you can actually trust businesses with your data, and that businesses disclose, and 99, my experience, and I have a lot, is 99% of Canadian businesses are doing everything they can to follow the rules. The thing is that we don't know what the rules are right now, because the legislation has, passed second reading for the federal legislation. It's been in committee for 2 summers. It's, without being partisan, it's in the middle of a huge political fight and kind of a worldwide movement towards, kind of what's truth and populism. And so the first thing that gets on the front page of the paper is an allegation that somebody's doing the wrong thing. And in most of those cases, they really aren't. So my experience working through various industry organizations and talking to a lot of our customers is that businesses really want to be compliant. They just, even if the legislation does pass, the new privacy legislation, the regulations aren't written. The regulations require a lot of detailed understanding. So that's why we went to look at world standard and best practices around personal data and signal data, and around anonymization and de-identification, and around the risk of re-identification. So we decided we're going to go all the way to the gold standard, and there could be exceptions based on people's disclosures and consents if they're legal along the way, but our governance layer in our data collaboration hubs is going to be where we think the puck's going to be when all of this dies down. And looking at the laws there's 22 states now that have state legislation. They don't have, federal legislation in the US. We look at the GDPR, obviously. We look at Law 25, which is probably, if you can comply with Law 25 in your data blending and collaboration exercise, you're going to be quite close to what the ISO would consider best practice. And then C27 has a challenge because it still has a clause that says anonymized and de-identified data can be considered PII under certain circumstances. If you're, and then, so I'm a part of Canon, which is the Canadian Anonymization Network, and Evan's on the Privacy Committee for the Marketing Association, and we do work with StatsCan. Okay, what are those circumstances? It's kind of important. If we bring de-identified data into a clean room and we mix it up and we provide you aggregate results where there's more than X number of people, is that okay or not? And the government, so I said that manages the legislation, and the Privacy Commissioner that polices it say, that's interesting, yeah, we have to think more about that. And meanwhile, businesses want to do things right now to leverage their first-party data. So my plea is help your organization understand, absolutely, we're not trying to get around it. We're not going to say, oh, people don't care about their privacy, let's just take a chance. We're not going to do that. Some people care, some people don't. People care in certain ways, but around the world, there's this mistrust of business using data, and we need to help Canadians, if you're a not-for-profit or you're providing different kinds of services, and consumers understand that if we use your data properly, it actually gets you the right products, the right messages. You know, in the 90s when we were in the direct mail business, we got interviewed by the Globe and Mail, and the reporter said, you, the postal code people, you're responsible for the junk mail I get. And we always used to say, we're responsible for the junk mail you don't get. And as data people, try to advocate inside your organizations for, of course, 100%, we want to respect consumer trust, but we also want consumers to understand that these kinds of tools will actually make their experience better. And when we have an opportunity to talk about that, we need to do that.
Agreed.
What is a project like this where you're have a collaboration between two companies, you want to match their IDs, and you want to see after the result, like what's your estimate of how long something like that takes?
How quick are your legal teams? And
Like, are we talking weeks? Are we
No.
talking years?
no, it's a very, there are two key factors. One is the administrative side and getting through compliance, risk, legal, privacy, and then there's how clean is your data. Those are.
After
Well,
that,
after that,
it's
it's very-
literally
It's
weeks.
very quick.
And
It's
like,
days.
some of our projects, people are setting stuff up that's going to be ongoing. So, you know, sometimes special reports and data flows, like pipelines actually have to be built. So legal and you know, compliance and purchasing first, data cleansing second. If it's a project, you're in business with results in, you know, less than 2 months typically. And if you're going to build something that's kind of we want to do this monthly and we want a 3-year contract, then there may be a need to build infrastructure, but the project could be done on a managed service way in the interim. So in the POCs we got a lot of things up and running quickly, and where we had long delays, it was on the side of the messiness of the customer data and the IT and security and legal people.
And it comes, you know, on the back end in terms of reporting, you know, there's sort of standard reports, you know, if you're just looking for an overlap and quantifying and maybe doing some, you know, geographic distributions and maybe overlaying a bit of segmentation. But if you want something more custom, then that has to be built out depending on the data that you're bringing into the clean room for evaluation. So there's those factors as well.
The other thing about that, if you are our customer and you're using Envision, I don't know if anybody in the room is, but Envision, our platform, is being rewritten as a series of web services with APIs. So maintaining the functionality, but modernizing it with release coming over the next coming months. And what we're doing is we're using the same tools and the same kind of platforms and the same, I don't know what the right word is, but the development paradigm, so that you might want, in your clean room, you might want to pull a routine that does a market potential calculation out of Envision. So we're going to make those two systems interoperable as well, so that data that you bring into your tenanted space in our clean room environments could interact with whatever you license, Prism or Wealth or our social values, and your analysis that comes out of the overlap could make use of existing report structure that we already have.
Any other questions? Don't be shy. Great.
Well, thank you all so much. I hope I get a chance to say hello. Is there more coffee and stuff out there? Okay, so it's still food and coffee if you want to have a chance to spend a little bit more time, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much.